The series name is What If Naruto Got Harem with Kushina x Terumi x Mikoto. So let's start the series. Mikoto Uchiha did her level best to remain relaxed as she gently rocked the toddler in her arms. It was starting to get toward the end of the day, and despite how affable of a child Itachi was, his nerves had frayed beyond what she could normally handle. Beside her, Kushina tried to reassure her with the usual sweet grin she gave her loved ones. But it just didn't quite measure out as enough after the last day, no days, plural of stress Mikoto had suffered through. Thankfully that might all end or at least become better after tonight. That's what her father had told her, as well as Minato. Kushina had told her a version of that same phrase every minute almost for the last hour. Everything will change for the better after this mess is finished, Kushina said with a sure tone, causing Mikoto to shift her eyes between the red-headed beauty and the door nearby. From within the room muffled voices continued to grow in fervor and volume until they grew into just barely unintelligible shouts. Really they should have thought of using a privacy seal for the room. But then again, none of what happened tonight would be considered for village security. It didn't quite require the security of such measures. A sudden warmth on her cheek drew her attention back away from the door and to her closest friend, who had decided to lay a soft kiss on her cheek in distraction. Kushina always was an unpredictable one. But still, even such an innocent gesture stirred memories of a different time for Mikoto, during her days as a kunoichi of the village, spending her time with Kushina and Minato. Longing ached in her chest just at the thought of it. Kushina, those times with you and Minato. Mikoto had to struggle with her own words and desires. There in the past, she finally bit out, though her voice was uncharacteristically weaker than she would have liked. Maybe, Kushina said sadly as she slid back into her own chair. Still though, Minato and I will always be there for you, even if you aren't ours anymore, Miko. The two women stared at one another until Mikoto's gaze dropped to the floor. She couldn't look into Kushina's eyes filled with love and care for her and not feel that ache in her chest return 100-fold. It hurt, but she knew life wasn't fair and she knew her father would come to some compromise, so she refused to even entertain the notion that she could enjoy her truest desires. Mikoto started to say something before she closed her mouth and looked back up to Kushina. Thank you, Kushi, she said before turning her eyes to her son in her arms. Kushina reached over with her hand, careful not to disturb the dozing Itachi, and took Mikoto's hand into her own. After gently squeezing one another's hands, the two women returned to silence as the voices in the nearby room had lowered once again to the occasional muffled sound. They hadn't been sitting for much longer after that when the doors to the office slammed open, causing both of them to jolt and waking the little boy in Mikoto's arms. Fugaku stormed out of the room and glared at Mikoto with an amount of anger in his eyes she had never seen before. No, he wasn't glaring at her, but at her hand, the one intertwined with Kushina's. The man's frown only deepened as Kushina gave Mikoto a comforting squeeze, but he eventually tore his gaze away to look at the woman he had called wife. The rage lessened and was replaced with disgust. I will have the right to see my son, he snapped before turning sharply, not even sparing the confused little boy a glance or a chance for either woman to get a word in. The next person out of the office was Minato. The soon-to-be Hokage looked a bit flustered by the whole situation as he scratched the back of his head with one hand. The thin tight smile on his face was easy enough for both women to see through and understand how stressed he had become lately. That filled Mikoto with some guilt, far more than the look of anger on Fugaku's face had shown. Anyway, Minato was busy taking over more and more of the village's operations as Hiruzen's successor, while also leading the talks for peace agreements with Iwa, Kumo, and Kiri, though the latter of those three seemed content to keep fighting even as whispers of growing internal tensions in Water Country made their way to curious ears. The trio stood in silence for a moment as Minato simply stared over at them. His eyes were always expressive, and especially now both of them held something in them that brightened at the sight of the Ravenet and Redhead side by side comforting one another. However, realizing he had stood silently for long enough, he cleared his throat and began to speak. Everything turned out better than we could have hoped. There was just a couple of hiccups, Minato explained. What do you mean? Kushina asked him. Before Minato could answer, they were joined by the third Hokage, Hiruzen Sarutobi, and the village elders, Hamura Mitokado, Koharu Udatane, Danzo Shimura, and Mikoto's own father Kagami Uchiha. The elderly shinobi all looked over the three younger adults and child with unknowable gazes before Danzo spoke sharply and emotionlessly. The three of you will form the first of a new restoration agreement that Hiruzen will be placing into action upon you all agreeing to be the trial group. That being said, it is mandatory you agree, as Fugaku was just led to believe the three of you have all agreed to this trial process back when you achieved Chunin ranks. Danzo spoke matter-of-factly, though it was clear that Minato, Kushina, and Mikoto had no real say in the matter, something that had Hiruzen sighing and Kagami scowling at the back of Danzo's head. Once you sign the documents, the two of you will officially be wedded to Minato as the matriarchs for the Uzumaki and Namikaze clans, officially freeing you, Mikoto, of any obligation to the Uchiha clan. Hamura explained in an only slightly friendlier tone than Danzo. Really, all the elders were Hardises to the bone. Mikoto was a bit taken back by the revelation. Still, internally she nearly wept in joy and released stress. Since her engagement to Fugaku years ago, she had never thought this could be a possibility. So Mikoto's marriage to Fugaku is officially over, right? Kushina asked, cutting to the point, or at least what she felt was the point, getting a couple looks from the elders. I have to say I'm surprised, Kushina. You are usually so territorial with Minato. I thought the idea of being made to share him with Mikoto would bother you more, Koharu pointed out in genuine surprise. The redhead's laughter caught most of them off guard. If anything, I'm sharing Mikoto with Minato. Those simple words had both Hiruzen and Hamura frozen stiff at the thought, while the tracest amounts of quiet giggling slipped out of their lips. Kagami looked a mix of green and purple in the face as they were talking about relationships with his only child, and his eyes twitched faintly as they zeroed in on Hiruzen and Hamura and spun to a crimson color. Danzo simply grumbled something about unpredictable Uzumaki freaks and stalked off to whatever hole he typically made his lair in, and Koharu just stared at Kushina with an unamused expression. The remaining two members of the group, Minato and Mikoto, at least had the decency to blush at the topic, unlike their more brash third member of their new family. Still a bit green and shooting fiery, Uchiha patented glares at Hiruzen and Hamura for no doubt picturing his daughter and her lovers in their head. Kagami led the group back into the office so they could get the backdated paperwork signed and put this whole business behind them. If you two would just sign that, we can finish up here, Kagami said as he waved at the two forms on the desk side by side. Mikoto handed the still sleepy Itachi to Minato as the toddler glanced around the new surroundings, too tired to really interact with the world around him. The blond man smiled at the boy and gently hefted him up into a comfortable position. Itachi was a very well-behaved child and didn't even seem affected by the change, beyond following his mother with his eyes, keeping her in his line of sight. The pair bent over the paper, Kushina barely skimming before she signed, while Mikoto took a little longer. She was happy she did as her eyes widened at the specifications of the agreement. Picking the form up, she read it again before turning to look over at the Hokage and elders, all of which sported collectively stoic expressions. This paper says that any sons we have with Minato will be automatically placed under the act as well, and that any women that he marries will be required to sign an amended agreement. The village would have too much influence over our children's lives, Mikoto said. Kushina stepped back over to the desk and snatched up the paper, reading over it more closely this time. Stopping part way down the page, she released a faint hiss-like sound and made to tear the page to pieces, only for it to prove surprisingly resistant. Shooting a glare at Minato, the man sent her a roll of the eyes back in response, causing her to turn her agitation on the four elderly shinobi on the other side of the desk. The seals on that won't let you tear it apart that easily, Kushina, Hiruzen said with an exasperated sigh as the woman slammed the paper back down onto the table. Then I'll disable the seals and destroy these documents, old man. She shouted back, only to stop when Minato spoke. We had to make some kind of concession, Kushina. We essentially asked the Hokage and elders to involve themselves in clan business. This could have been a huge issue for them if things blew up in their face. So to get them on board, I had to give up something they wanted, Minato explained. You drug us into this using the excuse of building up our forces with more bloodline-capable shinobi from strong stock. If this wasn't in the benefit of Konoha, it wouldn't involve us at all. This is how you pay the piper, so to speak, Koharu spoke sharply. You elders don't have actual power, only the Hokage. Hokage-sama, surely there's another way. Kushina began to argue, but her words petered off as Hiruzen shook his head at her. Officially, Kushina, they hold no official power in the village. However, The reason each of them is my advisor and elder to the village is because they have spent their entire lives building up their own realms of political power here and in the capital of Fire Country. If they truly held no power, I assure you Danzo would likely have been arrested by now for all of the antics he tends to get himself into, the aged Hokage said as he settled himself into his chair with a sigh. Hamura and I are still in the room, and Hiruzen, don't try to downplay your part in this. The old woman barked. Kushina and Mikoto shot the old man a paired set of betrayed looks, that caused him to let out another heavy sigh and nod sadly. It was the truth, he was Hokage after all, anything for the good of the village. Everything for the good of the village. Either way we should move on, the fact remains that we all will do whatever is best for Konoha, that certainly includes building up the honorable Uzumaki clan, and forging a Namikaze clan of powerful loyal Sharingan wielders. Hamura joined into the conversation. I don't think I much like what you are implying of the current Sharingan wielders we have, Hamura, Kagami growled, getting the other man to readjust his glasses slightly and frown at his old teammate. We know you and Mikoto are loyal to the village, Kagami, and Koharu began to try and intervene before a new argument could break out. But, you aren't so sure about the rest of the clan, is that it? He asked. Some of Sensei's prejudices should have died with him, Hiruzen groaned. If you two cannot see how the majority of the Uchiha have taken to hold themselves apart from the villagers, that is your own failing, Hamura threw in, getting a nod from his female teammate. This squabbling is getting us nowhere, Minato interrupted, stopping the argument. Shooting a look at Mikoto, he communicated his wishes without saying anything more. Despite her reservations, Mikoto leaned down and signed the paper on the desk. The guilt she felt about signing power in her future children's relationships over to the village pulled at her heart, but if she didn't agree, what would it matter anyway? She would struggle to give Itachi a happy life as it was with what Fugaku had attempted with him, and what he had planned in the future. Hopefully they would forgive her when time for that actually came around. With that done, everything we need is finished here. Come Mikoto, I'll have Satsuya and his wife collect your things from the compound and take them to your new place. I'll have them bring little Shursui too. He can play with Itachi, Kagami said as he walked with the new trio and the toddler they carried. Minato and Kushina continue ahead after getting a nod from Mikoto. The Uchiha turned Namikaze faced her father but quickly dropped her gaze to the ground. I'm sorry Dad, I know it's selfish of me, I should have just adapted and stayed with Fugaku, but after he took Itachi to that battlefield and made him, I couldn't anymore. Mikoto began to ramble. The stress of her recent struggles impacting her again, compounded by the worry of disappointing her father who was one of her most cherished bonds. Mikoto was shocked when he didn't answer her, not in that he didn't but because his embrace didn't require him to speak as he hugged her closely to his chest. The familiar feeling of his arms around her shoulders and the gentle shake as he chuckled calmed her roiling emotions instantly. I would do anything for you and Itachi to be happy and safe, Miko, Kagami said. What about the clan elders? They won't take all this lying down and they'll be especially unhappy that we allowed the village leadership to become involved, clan business being infringed like this, especially on the Uchiha. Mikoto quickly began to work herself back up again. Despite being a horrible father and husband, Fugaku is still an excellent shinobi and administrator, Kagami explained. I know that better than anyone, Mikoto groused. Be that as it may, Mikoto, Fugaku remains my legal heir. Thankfully Itachi will be required to remain his heir, but you and any other children you have been cut from the line of inheritance. They may have the Sharingan, but they will be Namikaze, not Uchiha, Kagami explained. The woman sighed and chuckled morbidly, I should have figured that. Enough of this talk, let's get you home, your new husband and wife have probably started to get worried, Kagami said, an odd expression passing on his face at the addition of wife to his sentence. That would take getting used to, he supposed. It had been 4 years since that day and not one had passed that Mikoto, Kushina, or Minato had looked back in regret. Even now, busy as he was with the business of being Hokage, Minato was far more warm and caring a husband to 2 wives than Fugaku had been to one alone. It helped that the 3 had been friends and lovers in the past, but it took work to keep love going and their relationship only seemed to grow stronger as time progressed. Another help to keep such happiness in the home was the addition of 2 new members of the Uzumaki and Namikaze clans. Even now Mikoto and Kushina couldn't help but coo playfully down at their sweet babies, all but looming over the women's shoulders, and seeming to try and compete on who could look more aloof and yet somehow overprotective of the women and infants. Kakashi and Itachi watched on. It was an interesting sight. Both Kushina and Mikoto were loving and warm women in general, but when it came to the little bundles in their arms they entered a new level of care that was a bit awkward to sit and watch. At least it was for the two socially awkward child soldiers. Then again, they weren't necessarily what one might consider the hallmark for emotional understanding. "Geez, would the two of you relax already?" Kushina said, turning her head away from her little son to look at the older two boys she considered just as much her family. "Kushina is right, Itachi, Kakashi, the two of you already put so much on your shoulders, it wouldn't kill you to sit and enjoy some time with your little siblings, would it?" Mikoto added, tossing in a pout, one matched by her red-headed compatriot. Itachi offered no resistance to the women plopping down onto the comfortable chair beside his mother and leaning over for a good view of his new baby sister staring up at him from her arms. Kakashi on the other hand was a little more hesitant. "I really shouldn't, I need to." Kakashi began to argue only for Kushina to shoot him a look. "You are the ward of the Uzumaki and Namikaze clans, which practically makes you our son, now do as you're told," Kushina said sweetly. Though the odd swish of her hair gave the boy all the information he needed to know about what would happen if he argued, beside her the flicker of red in Mikoto's eyes scared him just as much. Really, the two of them rubbed off on one another too much. Kakashi dropped into a seat and breathed slightly more relaxed when both women looked away from him and back to the babies in their hands. Kushina's son, Naruto's laughter had taken all their focus off of him, which he appreciated. Not even a year old and already looking out for his big brother. He was such a good boy. "Ah, did you like seeing your super mommies put that bad Kakashi back into his place, Naruto-chan?" Kushina giggled, snapping back to her bubbly personality. She laughed even more as the boy snagged some of her long hair in his hands. The woman loved letting him play with it. He didn't yank at it or even chew on it, just running his little fingers through the locks of hair like it was the most interesting thing in the world. As he continued to be distracted by her hair, Kushina gently rubbed his cheek with her hand, getting him to turn to look up at her face again. Kushina could never get tired of this, just looking down at her precious child. He was like the perfect blending of herself and her husband, red hair, slightly darker than her own. And already Kushina knew it would grow to be an organized mess just like his father's. Similarly, he had Minato's bright blue eyes, which Kushina loved so much. The rest of his features bore more of a resemblance to her, though he was a baby after all, so it was hard to tell yet. The unique whisker marks on his cheek made him all the cuter. That was actually a feature he shared with his sister laying in Mikoto's arms at the moment, though Naruto held an additional whisker on each cheek than she did. That had been something that shocked both mothers till their midwife, Biwako, had explained that it was likely due to the proximity of the Kyuubi's chakra during the conception of the children. That had set both women to blushing furiously at the memory. Nearby, Mikoto smiled as she glanced at Kushina fawning over her baby. The redhead had been so worried she'd be a bad mother somehow, which had both Mikoto and Minato nearly laughing due to her already babying Kakashi and Itachi so much as it was. Turning to look down at her own baby, Mikoto couldn't help the broadening smile on her face as bright blue eyes stared back up at her. Like Naruto, Masaki loved to play with her mother's hair. However, she preferred to have it tickled across her face, causing soft giggles every time the Namikaze matriarch drug her raven locks across the child's nose. Naruto and Masaki shared many features, like their stunning eyes and adorable whisker-like markings. They also both looked very much like their mothers. Masaki had her mother's black hair, though it was far more wild already than Mikoto's own straight hair. Masaki was overall a quieter child than her brother, but they preferred to be kept near one another and even shared a crib. While Masaki was a quieter child, she was also the more independent of the two. Far too curious for her own good, even now she was scrunching up her nose after trying to eat her mother's hair and learning it wasn't as tasty as she had hoped. Laughing at the cute face she made, Mikoto stopped her little girl from crying by tickling her, faintly pushing the child into another fit of soft giggles that had Mikoto happily grinning at the sound. "Mother, I want to visit Sasuke at the clan compound." Itachi caught her attention as he stood from his seat. Mikoto inwardly sighed at the detached manner of speech from her son, but was happy he wanted to be a good big brother not just for Naruto and Masaki but also his half-brother by Fugaku as well. "Of course, darling, just be safe," Mikoto replied, and Itachi quickly nodded before using the body flicker technique to leave. that alone had Mikoto frowning deeper. Itachi was only 7 and his father had already pushed him to that point in his training. That thought led to Fugaku and the rest of the Uchiha clan. As her father had said, the elders had confirmed Fugaku as heir to the clan should Kagami pass, effectively stating that in the eyes of the Uchiha clan she remained married to Fugaku and her daughter was a bastard born of unfaithfulness, something that she could see in their eyes whenever they encountered one another. The clan had largely taken the entire situation as a direct slap in the face to the clan as a whole, as if her marrying Minato was in some way pointed as just a slight toward the honor of the Uchiha. The clan seemed to grow more and more lost in their resentment with each passing day. Mikoto truly felt sorry for that little boy, Sasuke, sired by Fugaku on one of the middle-aged women, a widow named Tamako. The woman had raised 3 fine children, all of which had died in the Third Shinobi War. Now she was as gruff and cold as Fugaku himself, and while she seemed to give the baby all the necessities a mother was required to, Mikoto feared just what kind of person the two perfect Uchiha would raise. Now it seemed the clan elders along with Fugaku had begun to angle at taking more and more power for their clan. Her father had said that they intended to push Itachi into achieving the role of Hokage as the youngest to do so within a few decades, and little Sasuke would take his place as head of the clan, essentially cutting Mikoto's bloodline out of the clan leadership for good. It wasn't too surprising. For a while the clan had been split on her bloodline remaining as the heads of the clan. Her grandmother was the youngest sibling and only sister of Madara Uchiha himself. As he had no children, the leadership of the clan had passed to her husband and then her son, Kagami. Now though it would finally be passed outside the direct line. What has you so bothered, Mikoto? Is the idea of Itachi going to his father's place that upsetting? Kushina asked in a mildly worried tone. No, it's not really that, just thinking about the clan I guess, Mikoto replied, proving to be more perceptive than most expected, though by now her closest loved ones knew better. Kushina frowned slightly before nodding her head slowly. I feel bad for Fugaku's new son. Mikoto only nodded as Kushina partially hit the nail on the head with that comment. Fugaku and Tamako would no doubt love Sasuke as any parent did. However, she couldn't help but feel the boy would grow up in a repressive environment at best. At worst he would be more harshly treated than Itachi had been to make him into their ideal prodigy. The redhead, as she often did when Mikoto felt upset, reached over and intertwined their hands together before giving her a gentle squeeze. Don't worry, we'll do everything we can to help the kid out as he grows up. Fugaku be damned. Oh, we can even have little Naruto and Masaki be his friends and play together, Kushina rambled on. Mikoto smiled before leaning forward and kissing Kushina. Both had gotten back into the swing of their relationship over the last few years. They still drew some looks, especially when both of them included Minato in their public displays of affection, but it had grown to become a normal thing for them. After all, other more normal couples showed their love for one another with kisses and embraces in public all the time without anyone else batting an eye. Why should their unique circumstances be cause for changing their behavior? Kakashi had just been about to reach for the Ika in his vest, and the sight of the two women kissing tenderly froze him on the spot. The poor boy could only break the spell that had him staring when he noticed Kushina had ended the kiss and turned to smirk at him. She loved to pick on the boy. He was like a cross between a son and a little brother. Right now, she intended to tease someone else in a far more mature way. Kashi-chan, I need you to watch over Naru-chan and Saki-chan for a few moments, alright? Kushina said as she gently placed the red-headed baby into Kakashi's arm, swiftly followed by a raven-haired girl in the other. The Hatake could only sigh and nod in acceptance as Kushina dragged Mikoto to her feet. With that, Kushina practically dragged Mikoto into the house, both giggling like teenaged girls all the way inside and up the stairs. This left Kakashi alone with two babies staring up at him with curious bright blue eyes. He hadn't been alone with the babies for more than 3 minutes when suddenly Minato flashed into the backyard of his house. He looked around for a moment before settling his eyes on Kakashi and couldn't keep the smile off his face at seeing the boy holding his children so carefully. It was a rare sight to see the prodigious shinobi acting so gentle. It was a sight to behold. Minato almost wished he had his camera on him, almost. The dry glare his student shot him at the moment made him realize the boy had him figured out. Kakashi, could you, Minato began to ask before the boy rolled his eye and groaned. They went upstairs without you, Kakashi said. Minato's eyes glazed over and a goofy smile spread on his lips before he shot an apologetic look toward Kakashi. "You make a great babysitter, Kakashi," Minato said before shooting into the house and likely upstairs in his wake. Kakashi simply sighed again before glancing back down at the babies only for his face to pinch in disgust. Looking down at the happy-looking children, Kakashi groaned at the task of changing diapers. Maybe he should move back in at the Hatake estate. It was small for a clan estate but massive for one person. Surely it would give him the privacy he needed to read Ika Ika in dirty diaper-free peace. Hearing the two babies giggle as they caught clear sight of one another again over their small blankets, he realized he'd give up all that peaceful free time in exchange for staying close to these little bundles of joy. He was their big brother after all, it was his job. A 5-year-old Naruto and Masaki walked hand in front of their mothers down one of the larger roads of Konoha toward the academy. Both had grown to be adorable children just as their mothers and father had expected. Beside them, Itachi walked along the path to the school he had already graduated 4 years prior. In front of him was a boy around the same age as Masaki and Naruto that shared a few features with Itachi, though his hair had a slight brownish tint to its ravenette coloring. The Uchiha walked on the opposite side of his elder brother from the rest of the group, though. It was a recurring action whenever Itachi brought the boy around his other siblings. The hope had been that they could give all 3 children a friend in one another. Instead, Sasuke considered Naruto and Masaki as stealing his brother's time from himself and even had called Masaki an abomination in the past. That is, he had attempted to, settling for calling her a monster after stumbling over the word and making the others laugh. That laughter had been short-lived and Naruto had flung himself to his sister's defense in as eloquent a manner as a 5-year-old could. He'd tackled the other boy to the ground and tried to shove dirt into his mouth for calling his sister a name like that. The children had been at each other's throats since then, while Masaki tried her best to keep Naruto from jumping on the Uchiha boy, largely from her mother's urging. She wouldn't tolerate him being mean to Naruto any more than Naruto would of Sasuke being mean to her. As for the parents of Masaki and Naruto, they were predominantly sad when thinking on the situation. Sasuke clearly hadn't come up with those insults himself, which only meant that he was hearing such things about Mikoto and Masaki at home, which had led to bad blood to only thicken between the now sitting 4th Hokage and Mikoto's first husband. Once they were all dropped off at the academy, Naruto and Masaki headed to their classroom and found their seats. Sasuke sat by the window as far as he could from the Uzumaki and Namikaze siblings. That and everyone else too. Naruto and Masaki were soon joined by a handful of other students from their year. Shikamaru Nara and Choji Akimichi were among those they knew best in class. They'd been friends for a while as their parents all worked closely together and were friends to an extent as well. A line with the two boys was Ino Yamanaka, who was arguably Masaki's closest friend besides Naruto. Over the last year a young Sakura Haruno had also joined into their group, a friend of Ino's. When the children had all started the academy she had been sure to include the Pinkette in their time together. She was a bit of the odd one out, all of the other children in their group being heirs to a clan, but over the last year Masaki had pulled Ino, and thereby Sakura, into plenty of training sessions, leading to the civilian-born girl to actually be among some of the best in her class now that her physical abilities were beginning to catch up to her high grades in bookwork. Outside of the loner Uchiha and the clan brat clique, as some less friendly instructors had nicknamed their group, there were few notable students. Sai Shimura was a bit of an odd duck. He was an awkward but exceedingly talented boy. Supposedly he was the grandson of one of the village elders, but his parents had died and so he had largely been raised by staff of the small but wealthy Shimura family. Shino Aburame didn't seem particularly interested in interacting with other students, though he also didn't seem to actively avoid them like Sasuke did. He was just overly quiet and imposing, and as is common with small children, such things kept him at arm's length. His hive of Kikaichu didn't do him any favors. Kiba Inuzuka and his positively tiny partner Akamaru often drew the attention of the entire class, sadly never in a good way. The boy often tried to chat with others but never really clicked with them and focused more on his puppy. Still, he remained the most rambunctious of students, trying to get others' attention whenever he felt bored or lonely. The last of the notable students was Hinata Hyuga. Like most Hyuga, she held an air of superiority to others, even at age 5. Unlike the rest of them, Hinata was very vocal and hot-tempered. She interacted with Kiba more than anyone in the class, but never positively. simply striking or shouting at him when annoyed. Naruto and Masaki were the most popular students in class, drawing the attention of all their classmates off of their parentage alone. Even Hinata watched them from the corner of her special eyes. Not that she really needed to, given that she had arguably the purest Byakugan in generations, only truly rivaled by her elder cousin Niji and perhaps her baby sibling whenever they would be born in the coming months. Yes, Naruto and Masaki were popular, but that didn't directly translate into well-liked. Kiba was envious of the attention they got without even trying. Hinata wanted the same. Shino was wary of being near them because of that same attention they carried, and Sasuke despised them. Today though, there would be even more focus on them. The first day of student sparring had come and the other students, especially the heirs to clans and shinobi families, were intent on establishing the pecking order, even if they didn't understand that was what they were doing. Many children wondered how well they would compare to their classmates and if their friends they had made would do as well or better than themselves. Just as many though were focused on the Uzumaki and Namikaze siblings, they couldn't help but wonder if they'd live up to the hype their parentage gave them. So far the academy has been super boring, but hopefully when we start sparring today it will be fun, Naruto said, getting a few agreements from his friends. If it's boring to you too, why don't you just try to sleep or something like Shikamaru does? Ino asked the redhead. "'Cause I'm not boring, the class is, duh," Naruto replied, getting some laughter from his friends and a half-hearted glare from Shikamaru. Plus, Masaki started giving Naruto a look, causing the boy to stick his tongue out at his half-sister. "Plus my moms and dad and big brother all did pretty well in the academy, so I guess I want to too," Naruto explained. Sasuke heard the boy's choice of words and shot a glare up at Naruto through narrowed eyes. "Itachi isn't your brother," he said with a pinched expression. Naruto practically growled and opened his mouth to respond to the Uchiha, only for Masaki to cover his mouth with her hands. "Kushi-mama and Miko-mama said not to get into any fights," Masaki reminded him. "Fine," the Uzumaki said with a huff, "I hope I get Sasuke in sparring, I'm gonna kick his butt." The teacher gathered up the class and led them out to the sparring rings in the schoolyard. Suddenly the idea of sparring became much more real, and several of the children, primarily among the civilian-born kids, quieted down and clearly worried. Among his group of friends, Naruto quickly noticed the civilian girl among them had become more closed off than she normally was and decided to cheer her up by simply grabbing her hand like he often did with Masaki, and squeezing it. When Sakura turned to the red-headed boy, he shot her a toothy grin that stretched his whiskered cheeks in a way that reminded her of a kitten or puppy. "It's alright, Sakura, everybody will just do their best, you too," he said to her, causing her to smile back at him brightly. Beside them, Masaki frowned faintly and snatched up Naruto's free hand in her grasp. She wasn't sure why. Sakura was her friend too and she wanted her to do well in the spars. But she didn't like it when he spent too much time with their friends. Sometimes she wanted Naruto to herself, and the way he sweetly treated Sakura brought that same feeling forward even more boldly. Naruto, glancing at Masaki, quirked an eyebrow at her behavior before smiling at her too. "You'll do great, Masaki-chan. It's just like practice at home with Dad, Kushi-mama and Miko-mama," Naruto said, thinking she also felt nervous about the spar. "Right," she said simply, still not sure why she was acting as she was. "Alright class," the instructor called, getting their attention, "we're going to call you out in pairs to begin sparring. We're just here to see what you have got, so don't worry about not doing perfectly, just do your best. We'll be training you to improve after today, so this is just to see where to begin, alright?" The students seemed slightly less worried now that Tsubaki, the head instructor for first years in the academy, had explained they would be taught how to improve. They all still wanted to prove themselves though. "First up, Kiba, Inuzuka and Shino Aburame," Tsubaki called. Both boys walked up to their positions. Kiba looked excited though a bit nervous to fight someone outside his usual training with his clan. Opposing him, Shino simply adjusted his glasses and took a stance. The image of stoicism even as a little boy. "Alright, no killing blows, if I need to step in I will. Good luck boys," Tsubaki said as she lifted a hand then waved it down, starting the match. It was over very quickly. Several of the children laughed outright and the poor Inuzuka boy was embarrassed as he landed on his back and the Aburame heir placed a knee into his chest. "Winner, Shino Aburame," the instructor called. "Perform the unison sign." Shino helped Kiba up and both boys crossed fingers before rejoining the throng of students. Kiba tried to avoid others' eyes as he picked up his puppy only to see a couple of students, namely fellow clan heirs, were looking his way. What surprised him was that they weren't mocking or laughing at him like the rest of the children, instead they just looked at him as if they were still curious about what he could do. It embarrassed him all over again as he sank deeper into his fur-lined coat. Hopefully next time he got a chance to spar he could get a chance to at least show what he could do. Following Kiba and Shino's bout, a handful of civilian children went, including Sakura, who made easy work of her opponent thanks to the physical activity Ino's family, and the families of her new friends had placed her in. Choji and Shikamaru had also both gone, and even while looking distracted in Choji's case, or completely uninterested in Shikamaru's, they won their matches with a few quick dodges and strikes. Naruto Uzumaki and Sai Shimura, Tsubaki called out. Both boys stepped up to the ring. Sai was placid as he had been for the earlier parts of the year, but Naruto was a bit disappointed he wasn't going to get to put the Uchiha brat in his place. Still, he was excited at the prospect of a good fight against someone his own age besides his sister. At home the only other sparring partners he had were his parents, Itachi, and very rarely Kakashi. Begin! Tsubaki called out, waving her hand. Neither boy hesitated, rushing one another. Both avoided the other's initial strike before advancing past the other and pivoting smoothly and lancing out with kicks toward each other's heads. That was where both boys began to differentiate in the styles they had been taught the basics of. Sai's style was clearly meant to be used for genjutsu and ninjutsu-focused shinobi, creating opportunities to use their main skill sets. That being said, his skill with it was far above what any child his age should possess. Had he been properly equipped with a blade, it was likely he would have proven far greater of a challenge for the redhead coming toward him at speeds he simply couldn't match. In contrast to Sai, Naruto's style was vicious, or at least it would be when he was highly skilled in it. Multiple times Naruto struck points on Sai's body that would be devastating if hit at full power or kami forbid with chakra-enhanced limbs. Sai's joints ached and tightened slightly. His chest burned and he felt like his ribs were rattled, even after the training his grandfather had bestowed upon him. Despite not allowing him into his specialized program, Sai couldn't maintain his resistance against the pain, and tears welled in his eyes as he fought back the whimpers from the pain. Naruto continued on though, circling Sai and striking out whenever an opening appeared. A highly efficient and deadly style created by his mother and father would be what he eventually wielded. In its unmastered form for now, it amounted to mostly outpacing his foe and landing blows in the most painful places possible until they gave in. Finally, with his left leg giving out, Sai fell to a knee and Naruto stopped behind him, a blow frozen mid-swing. Both boys remained still, gasping for breath after what felt like an extremely quick fight for them. In reality it had been longer than most of the previous fights combined. Their classmates were awestruck at the abilities of the two. The instructors were shocked as well. They weren't completely caught off guard like the children had been, but still, to think such young students could be quite so well trained at such a young age was all but unheard of outside of geniuses like Kakashi, Hatake and Itachi Uchiha. Neither boy was to that level, of course. However, Tsubaki could already tell she would need teaching assistance with how split the education level of her students was. She would remain their primary sensei for the year and still handle most of the classwork and grading. But she doubted she could give her students the time they would need if she was constantly helping the civilian students catch up. Without even being prompted, Naruto helped Sai up and formed the unison sign. The quiet boy gave his former opponent an extremely thin smile before letting the Uzumaki lead him over to a bench to sit and rest after the fight had taken place. Masaki watched the interaction with a smile. Naruto had a tendency to make friends everywhere he went, according to her moms. Even as a baby, evidently he drew people to him. Masaki herself wasn't antisocial truly, but she didn't particularly enjoy the company of groups or strangers all that much. Still, seeing Naruto with others made her ire grow faintly. Her mood already was soured by the sudden anger she felt toward Sakura earlier had darkened once more, and she huffed while crossing her arms. Masaki Namikaze and Sasuke Uchiha, Tsubaki called out. Many students were surprised. This would be the first fight between a girl and a boy that they had witnessed. The Namikaze heiress was too focused on her own confused anger that she didn't care who her opponent was as she stomped into position across from Sasuke and took up her stance. Sasuke sneered at the girl opposite him. He hated her and her mother for taking his brother from the clan so often. Everything his mother and father told him about the Namikaze and Uzumaki made him hate them even more. there were plenty of other reasons for his hatred of the girl. But that she could unlock the Sharingan and not have the fan of the Uchiha remained the biggest one by far. His father had told him to leave his mark and put the Uzumaki and Namikaze clans in their place today. He would do just that. The moment that Tsubaki-sensei began the match, Sasuke rushed forward and engaged with his opponent, or tried to. Sliding around Sasuke's first punch and then under the second and third, Masaki grit her teeth as she had to bring her arms up to block the knee he aimed for her belly. Rather than shove it away, though, she did just as Miko-mama and Kushi-mama had taught, wrapping herself around the boy's leg and rolling with it. Shocked by the action, Sasuke lost his footing and both children tumbled to the ground. From there things got worse for him as Masaki's arms and legs became like steel traps for his own limbs. Naruto had been taught to strike the joints and most painful spots on an opponent's body and outpace and outlast them in a fight. Masaki, on the other hand, was taught to wrap her enemy up in as close as possible and get them locked with her eyesight the moment she could. For now though, rather than eye contact, her goal was a few good hard punches to the forehead and face. After the third hit on his head, Sasuke had gone from angry to royally pissed that not only was this half-blood getting the better of him, she was making it look easy. Sasuke was furious now. He wouldn't let some girl, one with dirted Uchiha blood or not, beat him. The boy managed to wrench himself free, though doing so caused his arm and hips to practically scream at him, pain from the strain put on the joints. Lunging at the girl again, he didn't expect her to sweep under his arms and wrap herself around him once again, like she was hugging him. He then got to feel a brief moment of weightlessness as he was hefted a couple of inches off of his feet and then slammed down onto his back, with Masaki quickly tangling their limbs together and pulling as hard as she could. Sasuke had tears running down his face after that. He hurt everywhere, and the longer the girl kept pulling on his arms, the more he was sure that she was going to rip them off. Just as he was about to cry out and submit, Masaki released him and rolled off him, taking her sudden action as overconfidence. Blinking through the tears of pain, Sasuke spun out a last-second kick connecting with her leg. Masaki! Naruto shouted when he saw his sister cry out in pain and fall, Sasuke quickly moving to continue attacking her. The red-headed boy was livid and practically flew toward the ring straight for the Uchiha. Tsubaki had already stepped in, however, and grabbed the Uchiha herself, tightly wrapping her hands around the boy's bicep, making him wince at the pain. The match was over. Sasuke, I already called for Masaki. Calm down, she ordered, only to have to lift the boy and swing around to keep him away from the Uzumaki projectile that went flying past. Naruto turned like a bull seeing red and tried to get a hold of the Uchiha boy once more as the rest of the students began hollering in support or generally making noise. Tsubaki shouted at both boys as Sasuke began trying his best to kick out at Naruto while she kept them separated. In the end, it was Masaki calling out her brother's name that put an end to the chaos that had enveloped the training yard. After he rushed to her side and helped her up, he all but carried her to the side of the sparring ring while glaring over at the Uchiha boy. Naruto and Masaki were quickly joined by their group of friends, a group that had seemingly grown with the addition of a few of their other classmates. Hinata had at some point implanted herself with Sakura and Ino and convinced them into being her friends, or at least the closest thing a proud Hyuga could claim to have as friends. Kiba and Sai had joined them as well, and while he hadn't remained with them, Shino had stopped briefly to offer his congratulations to Naruto and Masaki on their victories and ask if Masaki was injured by the Uchiha's cowardly and unfitting attack from a member of a distinguished clan. The rest of the afternoon was spent mostly with the children simply interacting with one another. The teachers had learned that leaving students to mingle the first day after spars until the school day was out would help to build bonds between them. Konoha's primary military doctrine focused heavily on cooperation and teamwork between its shinobi, and moments to get to know one another helped to build the framework for what would later become easier unit cohesion. Sadly for Sasuke, or at least in the teachers' minds, he would be excluded from this chance to interact with his classmates, and that, coupled with his actions at the end of his match with Masaki, helped to solidify his position as the outcast among his classmates, while a few civilian-born children would quickly forget and forgive the event. Sasuke's true peers, those of the heirs of Konoha's shinobi clans and families, weren't so prone to forget how he acted, not that it would be necessary, as after getting punished for the situation, Sasuke only grew to hate the Uzumaki and Namikaze children more. At the end of the day, Naruto and Masaki's mothers picked them up from school. Sasuke's mother had also come to retrieve him. Like her son all day she stood far away from the other parents and refused to interact with them, hardly greeting her child with anything more than a rigid nod before leading him back to the Uchiha compound. Kushina and Mikoto were both upset about what had happened between Masaki and Sasuke during sparring that day, but accepted the class's sensei's handling of the situation. They were happy both kids were collecting a group of friends from among their classmates and especially among their fellow heirs. Those were the children of their own friends after all. Once they got home, and they had checked to make sure both kids were in fact alright and not too injured from the spars earlier in the day, Kushina and Mikoto began their own training of Naruto and Masaki. They kept it focused on subjects the children had been working on over the last few weeks. For Masaki, that was trying to finally create a fireball, she had managed large gouts of flame up to this point, even some that had begun to take the shape of a large ball. But a truly sufficient version of the jutsu still eluded her. Naruto similarly had the beginning for his jutsu down, a barrier composed from his chains capable of forming a large sphere around himself and a group of others. He could create the proper number of chains and form the barrier, but maintaining their structure and durability for more than a couple of moments was extremely difficult. But combined with that same barrier being struck by weapons and jutsu, it was practically useless as it was. While neither child managed to make a breakthrough today, it was clear they both were getting closer. Naruto's chains now held up for the same amount of time under sustained attack as they once had without any kind of damage, and Masaki hadn't realized it yet, but she had begun shaping her chakra well enough to avoid injuring herself as she formed the burst of flame just as the chakra left her lips. Alright, now, normally you two would spar right now, but since you had your first day of in-class sparring we are giving you the rest of the evening off. Go get washed up. It'll be time to eat before you know it, Kushina explained, getting cheery agreements from the kids before they headed up to the estate. Both women watched as they went, bittersweet smiles laced their faces as they thought about how the two were growing up. They couldn't be more proud, of course. But every day Naruto and Masaki excelled at their shinobi studies and training more and more. It wouldn't be long before they were graduating and becoming genin, and from there going on to chunin and beyond. The speed that time passed when thinking about the development of their babies was almost unimaginable. The last half a decade felt like barely any time had passed at all. Just as Kushina was about to nudge Mikoto, who was especially focused on the backs of their little ones, Itachi dropped from the trees nearby with an odd look on his face that seemed out of place. He was typically a very reserved though content and kind boy, however he looked stricken at the moment, or at least as close as either woman, the two that had raised him, had ever seen. Itachi, what's wrong? Kushina asked, causing the boy's troubled look to seemingly double in worry, the expressions he made looking almost as if he was in pain. It's about grandfather, Itachi said before stopping, a bit of water building in his eyes as his mouth worked wordlessly to speak. Itachi had grown very close to his grandfather over the years. In fact, the man had practically adopted Itachi and his two closest friends Shisui and Izumi under his wing for the last 5 years. He seemed to see the potential in the three of them, and not just as shinobi, but as a new start for the Uchiha clan. A second chance. He called them to Mikoto and her sister, wife and husband, when they would discuss situations surrounding the clan behind closed doors. Wrapping the boy in a tight hug, Mikoto felt her own tears begin slipping down her face as Kushina soon joined the embrace. All three grieved for the man who had done so much for their family's happiness and who had helped to make Konoha reach such a peaceful state as it currently enjoyed. They grieved for the man who had acted like the father and grandfather they had needed despite not being a legal part of his family. While they stayed like that, tightly wound into each other's arms to comfort one another, a unifying thought slid through their minds, though they tried to ignore it and focus on the loss of their loved one out of respect. Fugaku Uchiha and the elders now had control of the Uchiha clan as a whole. Naruto and Masaki had grown quite a bit more skilled over the last 2 years. The two 7-year-olds had remained at the top of their class, with only Sasuke Uchiha surpassing them now. The boy had become far more determined and focused over the last couple of years, and far angrier as well. Slipping through his sister's grasp, Naruto narrowly managed to avoid a grapple that would have been Masaki's key to ending the fight, striking out with his own attack, a flurry of punches in quick succession. Masaki dodged or blocked each before twisting a leg around Naruto's own and sending him tumbling backwards. As both kids managed to regain their feet and proceed with the spar, their referee/babysitter Kakashi sat lazily on a large rock nearby and smiled behind his mask at his two charges. Both kids were testaments to their family's capabilities. He had no doubt it wouldn't be long before they were advancing through the ranks as fully fledged shinobi. He hoped to end up as their sensei when they did. This year would be his first outside of ANBU since before the two were born, and he knew Minato planned to begin having him testing genin hopefuls for a new generation of Team 7 soon. He just hoped he convinced Minato that he would do a better job than Itachi as their sensei. He had no illusions that Itachi hoped to get all three of his siblings on one team and convince them into cooperating better. However, Kakashi had peeked in on the three little brats interacting. They were like oil and water. Itachi had no chance of getting the three of them to get along. It would be even harder after tonight, Kakashi figured. After all, after tonight Sasuke would be an orphan and 2/3 of the Uchiha would be dead at the hands of their three most promising younger clansmen. Itachi, Shisui, and Izumi were all to eliminate Fugaku, his wife, and the elders and shinobi of the clan who had helped to plan a proposed attempt on Kushina and Minato's children. The three young Uchiha had come to Minato within the last few weeks to tell him of their clansmen's intent to kidnap and use Kushina and the children against him. Minato had tried for weeks prior to that to try and talk things out with the Uchiha who had begun to withdraw from the village at large. This was the last straw though. Threats to his village and even worse threats to his family would not be tolerated. While Hiruzen might have made a final attempt at negotiate or some other such method, but Minato planned for his three double agents to first eliminate Fugaku and the elders, then place Hiration seals across the compound so he could help them crush the other conspirators wholesale. Kakashi knew that after tonight, things were going to be quite different. He just hoped that the rest of the Uchiha learned from the mistakes of those slated to die, repeating such folly. Especially after Minato had told him he had intended to begin grooming Itachi as the fifth Hokage, would do nothing but result in more death for them. Perhaps some traitors would have to be killed by his own hands in the future if they tried again. That thought saddened him as it felt like he would be spitting on Obito's sacrifice. Kashi and I, where is Itachi and I? He better not be helping that brat Sasuke train instead of us, Masaki said with a scowl, causing Kakashi to sigh slightly at the girl. She had a special dislike of Sasuke for the way he stole some of their shared brother's attention. Now, Saki-chan, you know as well as I do that Itachi is fair to both you and Sasuke with his time. He's either on a mission or taking care of things for your dad, I imagine. Kakashi replied, getting the girl to cross her arms and pout cutely. Man, everybody is so tense and busy with Kushimama having a baby, not to mention it's really boring with everyone gone. I kinda wish we could have gone with them. Naruto commented as he plopped down onto the ground. I wish they took us to the hospital with them. I want to see the baby as soon as possible, Masaki said. Kakashi chuckled and opened his mouth to reply, only to freeze momentarily before turning his head in the direction of the western quadrant of the village. He couldn't say exactly what it was, but something ominous caught his attention. As the sensation intensified quickly but still subtly, he turned fully. The presence or whatever it was quickly blossoming in intensity as soon both Naruto and Masaki were also intently staring in the same direction. By now the hair on Kakashi's neck was on end and he felt his blood quickening as if his body was entering into its fight or flight response of its own volition. Stay close to me, he said to the children. He didn't know what was happening, but the feeling, coupled with the fact that it lay in the same direction as the Uchiha district, had him on edge. He would protect the kids with his life, but he couldn't shake the dread swelling up inside him. Just as he was about to tell the children to come closer to him so they would be within arm's reach should something happen, that something did happen. A flash just to their right and Minato appeared holding Kushina, looking much worse for wear. Grabbing onto his shoulder and standing beside him was Mikoto, who looked half panicked and frenzied. The last member of the little group was a tiny blonde baby held safely in Mikoto's arms. As Minato carefully laid Kushina on the ground, Naruto and Masaki scrambled over to their family while Kakashi stood frozen at the sight of some puncture wound on Minato's leg. It was bleeding badly, but he seemed to be ignoring it in favor of his family for the time being. Minato wasted no time as he planted a kiss, first on Kushina's lips then on Mikoto's. He gently brushed his newborn's head before laying his hands on the shoulders of his older children and giving them a squeeze. Without a word he stepped away from his kids with a sad smile and disappeared once more in a flash. Dad! The two children cried out as he teleported. Kakashi moved forward to help Mikoto and Kushina, however he could only to once again freeze in place as a new feeling of dread and terror washed over the whole village. In an explosion of smoke and debris, the form of the massive Kyubi rising to its full height over the village, resting directly on top of what once was the Uchiha clan compound. The group could only stare in horror at the towering monster as it let loose a roar that seemed to shake the world itself. 9 gigantic tails whipped about, cleaving furrows into the village and undoubtedly killing dozens or more. Kyubi. Kakashi whispered faintly in terror at the sight. He never imagined seeing such a thing in person, even from this far away. Kakashi, help me get Kushina and the baby inside. We'll be safer behind the other barriers, Mikoto said to her husband's protege. Right, kids, give us a hand here, Kakashi commanded. Both children snapped to it and began helping him get Kushina comfortably situated into the Silverette's arms. As the small group turned to move toward the family estate, the outermost perimeter flashed a warning briefly and the ANBU masked Itachi landed beside them. Kakashi and Mikoto frowned at the prodigy's status. He was covered in a thin layer of dust, probably from the clouds of dust being created by the Kyubi's rage. Here and there lines of blood soaked through the thin powder, tears in his uniform and straining skin around his eyes showing he was fighting back. Tears told the both that every stage of their plan for tonight had gone off the rails. At least whatever it was that the Uchiha hoped to accomplish had backfired as well. Please take him, Itachi rasped out. His throat was a little hoarse from overusing multiple fire-style jutsu to overpower the other Uchiha clansmen earlier. Sadly, it did nothing in the end as the Kyubi literally crushed the entire clan, including Shisui and Izumi, under its paws and tails. What? Naruto asked bluntly, though it did fit the situation well. Everything on this night seemed insane at the moment. I need you to take Sasuke. Actually more than that, Naruto. Masaki, look at me. I need you to promise me something, Itachi said, getting their attention. They could only watch as his eyes seemed to spin before they grew suddenly woozy and grasped at their heads, whimpering lightly with the pain of new headaches. While the little ones were distracted, Itachi turned to Kakashi and Mikoto and frowned sadly at his family, the one that loved him as much as he did them. There was no reason to push yourself so far, Itachi. You've only just gotten the Manjikyu and using it so soon like that. Mikoto said in worry for her son. It's fine, it had to be done. Everything we planned went wrong though. Shisui and Izumi are dead and so is the rest of the clan, but some people saw me killing off a couple of fleeing elders and now the plan has changed. I've made Sasuke see a version of me murdering members of the clan and now Naruto and Masaki are taken care of too, Itachi summed up quickly as he worked to clean himself briefly. Itachi, Mikoto started only for her son to shoot her a rare smile. It has to be this way. Take care of my little siblings please mom. Senpai, take care of our family, Itachi said before rushing off. Kakashi sighed sadly as Mikoto fought back her tears. This night was a nightmare made real for her, or more like every nightmare she'd had combined in one. Kakashi vowed silently to his younger brother in all but blood that he would take care of their family. After all, blood or not, this was Kakashi's family as much as it was Itachi's. As he sped away from where every other shinobi of Konoha was headed, Itachi couldn't help but wish a different outcome had been available. However, despite knowing his 3, now 4, beloved siblings would come to hate him for what had happened tonight, he also knew that it was in his family's interest that they remain clear of any part in the near extinction of the Uchiha. Back with the others, Naruto and Masaki had finally regained full power over their senses and were frustrated and confused. Not to mention terrified as they could only stare at the building ball of powerful chakra in the Kyubi's maw. As the ball of blackened chakra was launched, it suddenly seemed to have the world itself wrap around it before suddenly appearing miles away in the deepest parts of the forest and detonating. A bright flash of light, their first sign before the world seemed to quake from the power of the blast. After he cleared his head, Naruto turned to Kakashi with narrowed eyes. Why did Itachi attack you and Miko Mama? Why would he try to kill Sasuke? He loved him. Kakashi and Mikoto shared a look, realizing that Itachi had used a genjutsu to put a false memory in both kids' minds. Looking back at the frightened looks of the kids, he felt the urge to cry at the stress of the whole situation. To think that less than 5 minutes beforehand he had been simply enjoying watching the two kids practice on their combat skills, now he was lying to them to back up Itachi's ruse. Talk about it while we get these 3 inside where it's a little safer, Mikoto cut in. Right, Kakashi said as he slung Sasuke over a shoulder and gently shook Kushina to try and wake her. As she came to, the woman blinked in confusion for a moment before her eyes widened and she tried to move to her feet immediately. "Damn it," she hissed, it felt like her entire body was trampled and submerged in scalding water. "Where is Kid?" she demanded after realizing she couldn't get to her feet on her own. "She's here, Kushina, I have her, she's fine," Mikoto soothed as she stepped over along with Naruto and Masaki. "Thank Kami, Naruto, Masaki. What are you two doing? How did we get back to the estate?" she asked while finally taking in their environment. This was quickly followed by a horrified expression when she saw the Kyuubi on its rampage in the distance. "I couldn't stop him," she muttered quietly, a sense of self-loathing and defeat settled in her chest. The Kyuubi was her duty, even if she'd never asked for it, and it had escaped and was destroying Konoha. "Ma, no. It's not your fault, I don't know what happened but that's not your fault," Masaki insisted as she and Naruto helped her slowly to her feet. Kushina said nothing but simply grimaced in pain as she finally stood. Both Naruto and Masaki had been trusted around a week ago with the knowledge of the seal and Kyuubi. They weren't told the full details, like the fact that her seal would weaken in childbirth, or that Kushina wouldn't actually be giving birth at the hospital but in a secluded spot fortified deep within the Land of Fire's forests. The group struggled toward the house only to stop at the doorway when they watched Minato and the Toad boss Gamabunta attack the Kyuubi and subsequently disappear in a sudden flash. Teleporting something so large with him will have taken a lot of his chakra. He is probably running low by now, Kushina said in worry. Her mind ran through scenarios to figure out the best way to stop the Kyuubi. Her mind settled on a few, but only one was acceptable to her, glancing at her children, Kakashi included, and her lover. She couldn't help but feel the grief build in her chest. She would convince Minato to reseal it into her and she would die taking the Kyuubi with her, buying Konoha and their family time. It wasn't perfect but it was better than the alternative. Whoever it was the Uchiha had contracted to help them seemed intent on getting the Kyuubi for his own purposes if the monologue he was intent on giving as he ripped Kyuubi out of the seal was anything to go off of. As if on quest the thought of having him reseal the Kyuubi into her, Minato suddenly appeared before his family. He looked serious, more severe than ever they had seen him. Kushina noticed his sad eyes turn to the baby in Mikoto's arms and immediately her protective nature reared up in defiance of what he planned. The two young children weren't sure why, but they stepped between Minato and their new baby sister, causing his eyes to widen briefly before a bittersweet expression crawled onto his face. Reaching forward he drew both into a hug and felt pride and grief war within his mind. Realizing what had just happened, both Mikoto and Kushina gasped before reaching out toward the father and his two children crying out for him to wait. He was gone before the words fully left their mouths. "No! Minato, come back! Seal it back into me!" Kushina screamed out to the wind. It was too late, of course. He was gone and she knew what he planned for the children. Minato appeared standing over a kunai he had stabbed into the ground earlier. Masaki and Naruto were each held in one of his arms, slightly woozy from the sudden transport. As that cleared away they were shocked to see the massive Kyuubi restrained by glowing purple torii gates and Gamabunta holding its mouth closed. "Minato, whatever you are planning you had best hurry it up, the fox will break free soon," the Toad boss shouted. "I only need a few moments more," he hollered back before setting his children onto the ground and kneeling down to eye level with them despite the pain of his injuries from doing so. "Kids, I have to do something that you two may come to hate me for, and for that, I'm so sorry." Minato began getting slow nods from his children. They knew the gist of what was about to happen. After all, they were far more knowledgeable of sealing than any other kids their ages. "I want you both to know I love you with every bit of my heart, and if I thought there was a better solution." He trailed off with a sigh. "Dad?" Naruto began only to be silenced by a tight hug from his father as the man swept him and his sister into his arms. Minato stood back then and began weaving a quick series of hand signs. For the first time both children noticed they stood at the center of an array of seals covering nearly the whole clearing. Now those seals glowed an ethereal blue and white as Minato channeled the last of his chakra into the seal. Suddenly pain impacts both children in their very cores. Runes and symbols seemed to magically crawl up their legs and across their bodies before swirls grew onto their stomachs and began sizzling as if burning into their very body. Both children collapsed at the sudden pain, not able to witness the great Kyuubi dissolve into a red mist and fade into the array they laid at the center of. As they began to lose consciousness, the last thing either child saw was their father collapsing to a knee with tears running down his face as he finished his series of hand seals and pressed his hands to each of their stomachs, twisting slightly as if sealing a jar. With Naruto and Masaki unconscious, and Gamabunta taking the key to their seals to be held with the Toad clan, Minato used the remnants of his chakra to flash back to his family. Upon reaching them, though the Shinigami claimed his soul upon landing, his last sight of the living world was of Mikoto and Kushina hovering over their children weeping and Kakashi doing his best to watch over all 5 of the vulnerable figures and also check on Minato. "Watch out for one another, please," he muttered, only just loud enough for his wives and ward to hear him. As he passed, his newborn daughter Kido Uzumaki, blonde-haired and blue-eyed just like her father, finally woke up and began loudly crying. Walking to the academy, as they normally did, Naruto and Masaki held their little sister's hands on either side of her. Kido had grown into the spitting image of her father by the time she had reached 5. Her blonde hair was almost always in a sort of wild crown and her baby blue eyes had people practically become putty in her tiny little hands. Whether the little girl realized it or not, she was the light that kept her family above the darkness that seemed to always be waiting for them. With the loss of Minato and Itachi's betrayal, the family had been run through the metaphorical ringer. Mikoto had tried to interact and be open with Sasuke and the village, but the suspicion from being Itachi's mother and an Uchiha led her to be treated with absolute disdain from Sasuke and wariness from Konoha. She had found it was best that she not be seen publicly with the children too often, something Naruto and Masaki vehemently disagreed with. With Mikoto practically locked away in the family estate, it fell heavily on Naruto and Masaki to escort Kido to and fro throughout the village. The little girl didn't know anything was wrong. Kushina was increasingly busy running the sealing core of the village, and while she spent all her free time with Mikoto and the children, she sadly got little more than a few hours in the evenings to do as she pleased. Naruto and Masaki's existence as Jinchuriki had also darkened the family's world. They weren't spat on or treated poorly. After all, they were the beloved 4th Hokage's children. That didn't mean their mere existence frightened some people. Civilians and some of the shinobi most affected by that night kept them at arm's length now. Kido was oblivious to this. All she knew was her loved ones all held a certain feeling of melancholy about them, not that she knew that word, and she assumed it was due to the death of her father. She never knew him, though she did miss him as much as any child who had lost a parent would. Her bubbly and kind personality brightened up the rest of the family's lives, though. It was because of the girl's infectious spirit that the trio was all smiles. While there were times they had trouble dealing with the results of that night, the 3 siblings buckled down and became closer rather than allowing such troubles drive them apart, especially Naruto and Masaki. They had become very overprotective of their little blonde sister and were themselves inseparable. Kido would never know her father that she was the spitting image of. She was told stories of the man and treated like the princess of Konoha, essentially Tsunade 2.0, however there was an emptiness. No amount of stories or adoration from the village could replace a father. She didn't complain though, not once. At least not about that. "Do I really have to go to class?" she asked her siblings, sending them both the heartbreaking puppy dog eyes. Naruto began to waver, only for his sister to step in. She wasn't truly invulnerable to her baby sister's act, but the Ravenet used the same tactics on their brother to get her way as well. It would take something more than that to sway her. "Kido, you have to. I thought you wanted to become a kunoichi like me?" Masaki asked. "You're not a kunoichi yet," the little girl pouted. Masaki shot a slight glare toward her sister, sending the girl skittering behind Naruto. The red-headed boy sighed as his sisters began their playful squabbling. They meant nothing by it. If anything, it was a morning ritual between them, and he always ended up drug into the middle of it. The boy tried not to snicker as the little blonde stuck her head out from behind her makeshift human shield and stuck her tongue out at the older girl. "Little brat," Masaki playfully growled as she shoved Naruto out of the way and scooped the girl up and began peppering her with kisses and tickling her. Kido squealed and giggled as her sister played with her. Seeing the two of them like that brought a full-blown smile to Naruto's lips before he sadly had to break up the little game. It wouldn't do for them to be late, especially today. It didn't take long for the trio to reach the academy. Naruto and Masaki dropped Kido off to her teacher, the same one that had taught them as first years. Tsubaki looked at her 2 former students with an expression filled with a storm of complex conflicting emotions. The 2 older children didn't dwell too much on it. They knew that a lot of shinobi had lost their families that night, and the usual cautious nature of a good ninja made them a little wary around the children. Tsubaki was better than that though, and gave all 3 children a small hug before she took Keed off to class. The older siblings watched as they went for a moment before turning to head up the stairs to their own classroom. It didn't take long to reach the room. The lack of chatter was enough for them both to recognize that Irika had already arrived. They weren't late yet but still braced themselves for the overly strict teacher's attention. As they opened the door, the man simply watched them move to their seats. He wasn't overly harsh with Naruto and Masaki, and he didn't single them out, but they could tell he was not fond of them either. He was even less fond of Sasuke, and he held some form of reflectance with each of the clan heirs. Instead he was biased in favor of the civilian-born students, something that was almost unheard of in any hidden village. The fact that his favorite student, Sakura, was within their circle of friends was enough for Naruto and Masaki to excuse his bias. After all, it was kind of refreshing that the man didn't care about the kyubi inside them, but instead that they had so many advantages over their fellow students. As they found their seats, their friends greeted them. Hinata greeted Naruto warmly while simply glancing in Masaki's direction, while the others gave their own characteristic hellos. "Excited to come in second and third place after me in the exam?" Kiba asked with a playful smirk. "TCH, Inuzuka, they are the best in class after that prick Uchiha. If Lord Third hadn't put that restriction on age in place after the traitor, they would have been out of the academy years ago," Ino pointed out snidely. "Shut up, you fangirls trash, I'm at least gonna whoop your ass," Kiba snarled. "Please, dead last, I bet you don't even graduate. All you have going for you is the spar, and everybody but Choji and Shika will beat you there," Hinata chimed in, causing the boy to develop a pained look. It was pretty common knowledge that Kiba had an intense crush on the Hyuga heiress. The issue was that Hinata only had eyes for one boy, and that was most definitely Naruto. She hadn't been too mean in trying to let the Inuzuka down at first, but by now the Hyuga princess had had enough. She took nearly any chance she could get to put the boy down, and still he remained interested in her like a loyal dog. Kiba further deflated as Hinata moved to sit uncomfortably close to Naruto's left side, as his right was taken by Masaki, who glared at the arrogant brat of the Hyuga clan who seemed to think Naruto was her personal property. "Sit somewhere else, Hyuga," Masaki growled. There was a very brief moment where Hinata glared back before the Hyuga heiress released a scoff and returned to her seat between Ino and Sakura. Both girls looked a little awkward. They had remained friends with Masaki but had also found themselves as Hinata's clique during their years in the academy. Despite that, everyone knew that Masaki had Hinata beat and wasn't afraid to literally beat her to get a point across. Kushina had made sure all 3 of the children were more than willing to use their hands to get what they wanted. It had worked for her normally after all. Slipping into the free seat, Sai sent the siblings a faint smile and turned his attention to the front of the class. The Shimura boy continued to be an odd one. His demeanor was friendly enough, but he seemed more than hesitant to grow close to anyone, as if he was afraid to. "All right everyone, glad you are all here," Irika said flatly as he stared out at the class. The academy curriculum had changed heavily from when Irika had been in it a few years prior. He had been 2 years from graduation when the Kyubi attack had occurred and remembered how much fun things had seemed. Now though, things felt far more serious and rigid, and the young teacher had developed a more rugged facade to go with it. He saw the students through to graduation, the ones a single step away from becoming soldiers, and he refused to simply butter up generation after generation of fodder. It was why he showed some special treatment to the civilian students, like his favorite student, Sakura. The girl was 3rd among the females and 7th overall and was civilian-born and raised. His tone shifted to a softer one for the whole class as he thought not only of Sakura but all of them proceeding on into the brutal realities of their profession. He could stop pushing them. Today was their exam and the last day he had any control over their safety and continued life. A few students she hoped actually failed somehow. Not because he wanted them to do poorly, but because he'd rather they not go on to be soldiers of the Hidden Leaf. In the end though, his duty was to train and test these young shinobi in Kunoichi, and the time for the second half of that mission was here. The final exam. I wish you all luck and hope for your success. The first years will be starting transformation training this afternoon, so we will get the jutsu portion of the test out of the way first. We will start alphabetically. Shino Aburame, follow me. With that, the young man led the first of his students down the hall to the seal-reinforced room to demonstrate his abilities. One by one the students returned and called out the next student to be tested. Naruto was a bit exasperated that he would be among the last names called but kept his complaints to a minimum. He would have to sit and wait the same amount of time either way. Finally Masaki was called, and after sharing a brief glance with her brother and her friend she started off to the room. It was a short walk, but that was a small mercy. She wasn't sure why she suddenly felt so nervous. She had maintained the top kunoichi since her first year, with her only real competition being Hinata. However, Hinata had never been all that close to taking the position from the Namikaze heiress. She was simply above the competition. Stepping into the room, Masaki took calming breaths as her mother had taught her to while making her way to the center of the room. Irika finished writing something and greeted her, though she found she instinctively answered rather than actually comprehended the question. Her mind instead focused on her mother's words from back when she began teaching her fire techniques. Stable breath, stable body, stable mind, stable chakra. It all starts with a calm stable breath, darling, Mikoto's loving voice whispered into her ear. Alright, Masaki, let's begin with the transformation, shall we? Irika asked, getting a nod as his response. Transform into the third Hokage please, Irika commanded, and Masaki made the hand sign, easily transforming with a small burst of smoke revealing the wizened Hiruzen Sarutobi. Irika nodded, grading the performance and realism of the transformation. It was easily the second best transformation he had seen so far. Well done. Next is the clone jutsu. 3 is enough to ace this portion. Without even breaking the transformation, 5 clones appeared before the instructor, each with the perfect appearance of the third Hokage. More than excellent, you can release both jutsu now, Masaki, Irika said as he pointed to a log leaning against the far wall. Substitute with that and you will have passed the basic 3 and your elective jutsu will be all that's left. Once more Irika was unsurprised as the girl easily replaced herself with the log and back again. By now most students would be huffing for breath and heavily sweating. Masaki was proving her remarkable reserves by not looking even slightly bothered. Masaki paused briefly for the DJN jutsu. She had known she would use a fire jutsu for some time but was somewhat concerned that Sasuke was thinking along the same lines. She shook the thought from her mind though. Despite that desire to appear completely separate from Sasuke, she had no need to worry about her grade being affected. She still wanted to do better than him though. Settling on a jutsu that would leave her plenty in the tank for the Taijutsu exam still to come. Masaki ran through a set of hand signs before finishing with a total sign and pressing her lips together as if she was blowing a kiss. A burst of flame sprang into existence just past her lips and swirled into a single tall pillar of fire. The inferno was easily double the width and height of the average person as it spun faster and hotter as more chakra and fire was poured into the technique by Masaki. Slowly she eased off on the chakra fueling the attack, and the flames rolled before dissipating in a black smoke and faded entirely. Thanks to the seals plastered across every surface of the room, the building didn't hold a single scratch from Masaki's technique. Excellent, Masaki, what was the name of that one? Irika asked. It's my mother's trademark jutsu, Burning Storm. It's a low B rank because it takes time for the flame to spiral up, but I want to make a faster version that will be an A rank, Masaki responded with cheer. She was more than happy with the apparent pass from her teacher. No doubt you will, you can go Masaki, send in Junko Natsunuma please, Irika said as he scribbled some notes. The Namikaze girl was quick to make her way back to the classroom and called out the next girl for the exam. As she was the normally more reserved of the Uzumaki Namikaze duo, she couldn't help but grimace at the teasing look Naruto was sending her as she nearly skipped back to her desk. I don't even need to ask, do I? Naruto joked as he smiled to his sister. The Ravenette put on a false arrogant sneer. She scoffed and flipped her long hair over her shoulder. The girl held the pose for a moment before breaking into excited giggles. It was easy, she grinned at the redhead. Well, for me it was. You might need to worry. Right, Naruto laughed lightly as a depressed-looking student returned and sent the next on the list to the instructor. Soon Sasuke was called forward and the boy stood up silently and stalked out of the room, ignoring all of those around him. Had he looked back he would have no doubt sent glares to Naruto and Masaki as they sent him slightly pitying glances. They didn't like him by any stretch of the imagination. However, the wariness that the two of them were treated with now was far worse for Sasuke. Between the psychotic elder brother, rumors of Uchiha madness, more rumors of Sharingan in the Kyuubi's eyes, and yet even more rumors of some sort of Uchiha conspiracy that never came to fruition. Sasuke was considered by a great many within Konoha as a stain on the village. That stain bore a powerful bloodline though, so just as many, if not more people than were disgusted with the Uchiha scion's residence in the village wanted him placed under a similar contract to what Naruto and his late father had been. After all, worry that the Sharingan could go extinct with only 3 people in the village possessing it and 2 of the 3 being women of the Namikaze clan. Sasuke was a valuable asset. The little shit was still a rude brat though, a fact that Naruto and Masaki were reminded of as he strode back into the room and simply grunted out Uzumaki, as if the mere word burned his tongue. Sasuke received the pity of the siblings, though not enough that they weren't scowling down at him as he retook his seat for his usual attitude. Well, wish me luck, Masaki, Naruto said with an exhale of breath. Sure, but you don't need it, just hurry up, I want to get to the rest of the exam already, Masaki said with a confident look sent her brother's way causing him to fire back a corny thumbs up in response. Like Masaki, Naruto had no trouble at all with the basic 3 jutsu. Had he not gotten early training or known how to control his chakra prior to becoming a Jinchuriki he might have had issue with the clone jutsu, but the fact that his chakra was imbalanced toward yang energy was much less of a problem than it could have been had he not been prepared. Excellent job so far Naruto, show me what you've got for your elective, Iruka said calmly, though he had been relatively pleased with the results so far. Those he felt were ready were passing easily enough while those that he hoped to remain behind another year or more had almost all already failed to meet the requirements. With the few students left he not only had no doubt in their passing, but that they were ready for what was to come. It brightened his mood considerably more than what Naruto could admit being used to from the man. Yes, sensei, Naruto said before he tossed off the jacket he had been wearing. Iruka was a bit surprised but let it pass as the boy seemed to brace himself in a stable stance. The reason why Naruto had discarded his jacket became clear soon after that. While it was clear the technique would eventually reach a point that he could keep his outerwear on without damaging it, as it was the constructs of chakra that formed close to his body that began to appear only slightly past his shirt. Soon 7 thick chakra chain constructs twisted and coiled as if possessing a mind of their own. One wrapped around and lifted the log used for substitution while the rest began to form a faint blue barrier between them creating chakra-powered walls. Iruka nearly jolted in his seat when the one lifting the log had stopped what it was doing to lightly coil around his arm. Rather than fight it the instructor allowed his student to continue showing off his technique and Iruka gasped slightly as he felt his chakra become suppressed in the appendage that had been ensnared by the chains. Immediately after that Naruto released the technique, and like his sister earlier, looked as fresh as could be. Iruka actually felt more drained than the Uzumaki likely did. While the chains hadn't siphoned his chakra, they had suppressed it and having chakra suppressed and released in such a way was straining on the body in a particular way. He doubted that Naruto had known that but Iruka could feel the fatigue, not only his arm but his whole being after the chains had done their work. Good job, send an Ino when you get back to the room, Iruka commanded politely while he rubbed at his left arm. The chains left an odd sensation in it after they had left, something unpleasant but not painful in any fashion. Naruto bowed respectfully as he left and was down the hall to the class quickly before sending info in. The blonde looked nervous but calmed down with Naruto's slight comforting. All the cheer that Masaki had at seeing her brother's happy face and knowing he had passed the first portion of the exam evaporated. She didn't hate any of the girls in her class, though an argument could be made that Hinata Hyuga was an exception to that rule, but she had slowly grown more and more standoffish with some of them, always when concerning Naruto. She wasn't stupid, and she knew of the eventual expectations placed on Naruto to take multiple spouses. However, she couldn't stop the irritation that bled into her heart every time Sakura or Ino, or Kami forbid Hinata were close to Naruto, whether physically or emotionally. Naruto had even stopped bringing up any other girls besides their mothers and sister because he knew it would put her in a bad mood. As he approached his seat, Naruto's smile dipped as he saw the look Masaki was giving Ino's back as the blonde left. He narrowed his eyes at his sister and lightly flicked her ear, causing her to squawk and clutched the side of her head while shooting a glare at him. Masaki, she's your friend and she's nervous about the exam, he said with a rare serious expression. The Namikaze scowled briefly before her eyes softened and darkened in equal measure. He was right, she always hated to admit that, and now she felt guilty for her attitude toward Ino, so to try and make up for it, Masaki mentally reprimanded herself and determined to give Ino plenty of support when she returned. It didn't take long. As she passed by Masaki's desk, the Jinchuriki reached out and gave her friend's hand a squeeze and smiled at her. "No sweat, right?" she asked. Ino hesitated only briefly before a confident smile sprung onto her face. "Yeah, no sweat. Who do you think I am? Kiba? What the hell is your problem with me, woman?" Kiba blurted out from across the room. "The same as everyone else's problem," Ino scoffed while flipping her hair over her shoulder. The girls, including Sakura and Hinata, giggled at that. Kiba often found himself the target of their teasing when they weren't out for one another. "Alright everyone, find your seats, we have the written exam and spars left and I want to try and get everything done before lunch, understood?" Irika called out, getting a round of "Yes sensei" from the class. As he handed out the paper, his thoughts centered on the discussion over the weekend with the Hokage and the expectant senseis for this year's graduates. While it was still just a rough draft, the teams were organized prior to the exam based upon skill and compatibility. A lot of work went into deciding who worked best where and with whom as their teacher. There were 3 students per team and each teacher had a specialty that made it even more complex as each individual had to be weighed against the team as a whole before they were assigned there. Thankfully, this year the passes and failures were more clear from the beginning and Irika doubted any last-minute tweaks would be needed to the teams. They were already breaking some old traditions, but it was fine as long as the teams were effective. As he watched the students work away at their tests, he doubted they could be anything but effective. They had a total of an hour to complete the test, but the group finished with roughly 15 minutes left to spare. That was fine with Irika. The faster they could get everything done the better. "Let's head outside to the sparring rings. Some younger students will be watching, so make sure you represent yourselves and the village as best as you can. You're testing to become shinobi. It's important you set good examples for your juniors as part of that," Irika lectured as the class stood. When they arrived at the training yard, all but the first years were present to watch them spar. Naruto and Masaki were a little disappointed that they couldn't show off in front of Kid, but rather easily focused on the situation at hand. A few others from their class seemed to have become far more nervous due to the fact that they had an audience, a large one at that. "Okay, so for a treat for the younger kids and to give some of you multiple chances to get a better grade, I have decided with the other teachers to run this exam as a sort of tournament. I already have the bracket written out, so let's begin," Irika called out. The younger kids buzzed with excitement, whispered chatter and little fingers pointing at the better-known students. Much of the attention rested on Naruto, Masaki, Sasuke, and Hinata. They were the heirs to the most famous Konoha families after all. Even younger children had heard of them. "First up, Naruto Uzumaki and Kota Katsudari," Irika called out. The 2 boys entered the circle, Kota on edge and Naruto calm and confident. Kota came from a civilian family of bakers but had done well compared to most other civilian children. Sadly for him, Naruto was not a civilian child. "Alright, Taijutsu only, and you will stop when I call the fight or your opponent submits. Perform the sign of confrontation and begin," Irika called. The boys did just that before Naruto blurred toward the civilian boy faster than he could defend himself. The children, excluding the graduating class who had seen it before, gasped and watched as Naruto easily landed 5 lightning-quick blows on Kota before easily sliding under a wild hook and landing 3 more fast powerful jabs up the length of the boy's arm. Kota hissed as he tried to backpedal away from Naruto, but the Uzumaki was much faster than him. Naruto circled around the boy and landed a couple more strikes across his back before sweeping Kota's legs out from under him and dropping him like a sack of rocks. The moment Kota dropped, Naruto was on top of him ready to land even more painful strikes, this time to the other boy's face. "That's enough. Naruto wins," Irika called out, and Naruto froze. The redhead hopped up and helped the civilian boy to his feet and out of the ring as the audience clapped and cheered. The next pair of children entered and the tournament continued on. The first round for the boys was as Naruto expected. He personally had a bye round for the second. Kiba narrowly beat Choji, only because the bigger boy yielded. Sai beat Shikamaru after a short bout that surprised most of the class that knew the Nara tended to simply forfeit fights. Naruto could tell he did just enough to get a pass though. Shikamaru was always holding something in reserve.